My name is Tim Hunkin. This is me. I trained as an engineer, but I now write and draw a cartoon strip for the Observer Sunday paper. It's in the back of the car supplement called The Rudiments of Wisdom. I take a different subject each week and pick 8 or 10 facets of it, usually with a slightly engineering bias. I also make mechanical sculptures, sort of three-dimensional cartoons. This one's called The Zoo. It's supposed to be an animal's eye view. Some of my sculptures are made for particular sites, and others, like this one, go on tour around art galleries and fairs. I get great satisfaction from building machines that make people laugh. The frustrating thing is that, like all other machines, like cars, pocket calculators and even planes, they can go wrong. This is the sort of trouble I have. People feel cheated if it doesn't work. So, this programme's rather a personal look at the subject, drawn partly from my own experience with the machines and partly from facts I've picked up while researching the Rudiments of Wisdom cartoon. It's divided into 5 parts. First, there's a bit about Victorian machinery and how it probably wasn't any more reliable than machines are today. Second, how engineers tend to be intensely conservative about design to make machines more reliable. Third, there's a section about testing and how it often doesn't prove the reliability of new components. Fourth, there's a bit about aeroplanes and things that need to be totally reliable. And last, there's a bit about the perils of fiddling with machines. Steam engines are very impressive. You can see what every part does just by watching it. However, the ones that survive were among the best machines of their time. The unreliable and badly made ones have all disappeared. And even the ones that look most impressive can have their problems. This 1912 petrol engine is affected by damp. It can take half a dozen men over an hour to get it going.
That's it. She's away now. She's going. She's away. No. She's away now.
Just because a machine is made to last forever doesn't necessarily mean it's reliable. This machine has been unreliable for 70 years. It's solid enough to go on being unreliable for another 70. An important difference between Victorian machinery and machines today is the degree to which they can be repaired. In the early 19th century, most machines were repaired by local craftsmen, making their own replacement parts where necessary. Farmers have continued this tradition until recently. As machines became more complicated, parts became interchangeable, and firms started selling spares to be fitted by local tradesmen. If something like this adding machine broke down, spare parts would always be available to repair it. A modern plastic calculator would simply be thrown away. Replacing one is cheaper than repairing it. It's a consequence of modern assembly techniques. Gluing parts together is cheaper than using nuts and bolts. It doesn't necessarily make things less reliable, it just means they have a limited life. Plastic's almost impossible to repair, so there's no point in making the other components last longer than the plastic ones. Today, this limits the life of even the most expensive machines. But immortality is not always good engineering. A more practical ideal is this. All the parts are designed for the same limited life. Another principle of good engineering is to build on your own past experience. With this machine, I didn't. It's called the Q, and it lives outside a bakery in Neal's Yard, Covent Garden. As an experiment, I used silicon chips for the timer. It doesn't always work as well as this. The timer's not reliable. It's probably my lack of experience with the electronics. I've since become more conservative and I now use more traditional timers. On one disastrous occasion, they forgot to empty the coins. They piled up so much that they fused all the circuits. The principle of using units you've used before and that you know work is widely applied to make machines more reliable. The car's a good example. A new design of car uses at least 90% of components already tried and tested on previous models. The layout and major components have changed little since 1905. The petrol engine's the development of Gottlieb Daimler's. The radiator water cooling system was first used in 1896. There's also Ackermann steering, the differential patented for tricycles, William Maybach's carburettor, and the Bosch spark plug ignition. And in fact, if you date the rest of a car in this way, you find that most of the parts are simply improvements on the originals. This conservative attitude to design has led to cars which are quite efficient and reliable, but boringly similar to each other. It's often said that if as much money had been spent on the development of the steam engine as we've spent over the years on the petrol engine, it could be at least as efficient and convenient. It would certainly have a lot cleaner exhaust. The APT, the Advanced Passenger Train, is an example of trying to change too much. Almost every component's new, designed from scratch. However, the lightweight gearbox is overheated, the brakes kept seizing, getting power to enough wheels was difficult, and, of course, the famous tilting system jammed. After 10 years' development, much of this innovation may now have to be scrapped before the train's reliable enough to go into service. This may turn out to be my version of the APT. It's a combination of a lot of things I've never attempted before. It's a water clock that I and my partner, Andy Plant, finished in June for a shop in Covent Garden. This tube shows the minutes with a rising float. We've had some trouble maintaining a constant flow. On the hour, when the tube's nearly full, an electric timer empties it. Simultaneously, water is released from a separate tank on the roof. The water operates the bells, and also the figures at the bottom. As the water level in the troughs rises, plastic flowers come up on floats. There are also other surprises. Neither Andy nor I had made anything like this before. We've had to go back a few times since it was installed to sort out teething problems. We don't yet know if the whole thing will keep getting clogged up with dirt. The dust from the building site next door hasn't helped. We don't yet know how long the bearings will last, and we're not quite sure what will happen in winter. We thought of adding antifreeze, but our current scheme is to fit an immersion heater in the tank on the roof. Before we installed it, we tested the whole system out on the side of my workshop. We found we could reduce the splashing by fitting baffles to the cups that ring the bells and rubber tubes to the watering cans. We ironed out lots of problems. Testing it out like this was extremely valuable. Before being put into a machine, any new component's thoroughly tested under extreme conditions till it wears out, like this aero engine. Tests aren't always reliable. One of the commonest reasons why they fail is the so-called human factor. A good example is quick-drying high alumina cement. After years of exhaustive testing, by the mid-70s it was widely used in pre-stressed roof beams. Several of these have collapsed. The problem was that in hot weather, if slightly too much water was mixed in, a slow chemical reaction occurred, which eventually destroyed the strength of the concrete. In practice, it was easier to pour the concrete when it was slightly too runny. The designers didn't anticipate and test how the contractors would actually use the stuff. Testing the life of materials, particularly ones that have to last a long time, is always difficult. The long-term safety of storing radioactive nuclear waste, for example, is almost impossible to test. Paint's an interesting example. That's very difficult to test. Pigments mixed with linseed oil are amazingly permanent. During the Renaissance, when they were first used, no one could have known this. Leonardo was a great experimenter. Many of his paintings have been lost because he experimented wildly, using resin, wax, tar, urine, and even insects. We're probably quite lucky that any of his famous work has survived at all. Acrylic paints are now widely used instead of oils. No one can yet be sure how long they'll last. They've only been around for 20 years, but the chances of success are pretty good. Almost all the pigments are the same as those used in oil paints, and some, like sepia, yellow ochre and vermilion, have been around since Roman times. Only the medium, acrylic resin, is completely new. The dyes used in colour films and snapshots certainly deteriorate. This promotional film from 1952 was once full colour. Now it's almost all faded except the magenta.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Most film archives are now kept in cold stores to slow down this effect.
Take a bow, George. I don't know how you do it.
If I were to tell him how I do it, what a laugh there'd be. Horlicks.
This tissue paper sheep is probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to test. The talcum powder stops the paper sticking when it's folded. It's one of 300 commissioned by the Pink Floyd pop group for their 1977 American tour. The sheep is loaded into a cardboard shell and fired in the air by a gunpowder charge. I hadn't tried one out since they were made, and I wasn't sure if it would still work. The prototypes were ridiculously difficult to get right. Not only did the sheep catch fire or fall in the marsh, there was often too little of the shell left afterwards to work out what had gone wrong. It took 3 months to get them completely reliable. The aircraft is a good example of something that can't be allowed to go wrong. It's actually wonderfully safe. This isn't a plane crash, it's a scrapyard. They're mostly bits of 707 over there with a Hunter on the top there. I love scrapyards. And they're actually quite good places to see how planes are made. All aircraft are designed to be fail-safe, or to use the technical jargon, damage tolerant. For example, there are 2 joysticks, 2 sets of control wires, and a lot of the wiring is duplicated. For all the essential systems, there are backups. But this isn't infallible. For example, in the DC-10 crash in Paris, when the cargo door fell off, the cabin floor collapsed, and this severed not only the main cables, but also the backup cables as well. When all the parallel systems fail at the same time, this is called a common mode failure. It's usually fairly disastrous. One way of preventing this is to build in different systems that work in different ways. For instance, electric power can come from generators driven by the engine. It can also come from the hydraulic system, the hydraulic pump, and it can also come from batteries, all at the same time. Since the DC-10 crash, the control lines now have to travel by different routes to those of their backups. It's an attempt to avoid a common mode failure. And even this is not infallible. Dead chickens like this are used in a series of tests designed to find out what happens when a plane in flight hits a bird. Bird strikes can be a major hazard, especially on takeoff. A pre-packed bird is loaded into a compressed air gun and then fired at different parts of the airframe. For example, the pilot's windscreen. Or a wing. A common mode failure can happen when a flock of birds stops all the engines at once. But this is rare. Usually at least one engine can be restarted, and all modern airliners are built to keep flying on just one. My most reliable machine's in Carnaby Street. It's nowhere near the same standard as an aeroplane, but it does use the same principle of having backup systems. It's a water-powered sign for a shop called Cascade, and it's supposed to operate continuously for 12 hours a day. This is the prototype in my workshop. The complete thing is 24 foot wide. We've tried to make it quite simple. There's an independent mechanism for each of the 8 fishes. There are 6 separate pumps, so even if a pump or a fish stop working, the rest will carry on and the failure will hardly be noticed. This burning desire to make the thing reliable is not through any great love of craftsmanship. The less it breaks down, the less will be called out to repair or maintain it. With airliners, on the other hand, regular maintenance is essential for safety. A traditional technique used to ensure the reliability of planes has been to assign a life to every component. At the end of the rated life, it would be changed, although it would almost certainly still be working perfectly. Every time the plane came in for maintenance, a few parts would be replaced, like this heat exchanger. However, it's obviously expensive and wasteful changing perfectly good parts. A new method of maintenance is taking over. It's called condition monitoring. Various test circuits and procedures are designed into the plane. In the engine, the turbine blades are inspected with an optical fibre device called a borescope. Oil filters are examined to see how many fragments of metal have worn away. The idea is that you run through these tests every 500 flying hours and leave everything alone unless one of the tests reveals that something needs doing. The engines are also run up to speed on the ground. A lot of information about their condition can be deduced by careful analysis of their temperatures and pressures, etc. Engine vibration is also measured. All these recordings can give some indication of parts beginning to wear.
McDonnell Douglas, who make DC-10s like these, sell the concept with the catchphrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Condition monitoring has the disadvantage there are some faults it may miss. Many parts of the airframe are inaccessible and can suffer from metal fatigue without being noticed. However, since the early comet disasters, there are remarkably few examples of this.
Condition monitoring has another advantage. It's often best to leave things that are working perfectly well alone. Any repair runs the risk of introducing a bit of dirt, wearing the thread of some vital nut, or forgetting to replace some vital part. In the past, aircraft accidents have almost certainly been caused by this kind of fiddling. The principle of leaving well alone can be useful. There are many mechanisms in my machines which ought not to be reliable, but which have withstood many thousand operations. The glass is shot along the bar by an old spin dryer motor underneath. When his hand reaches the end of its track, the motor stalls. I was expecting this to burn out the motor, but it hasn't, so I've left it alone.
I think this fiddling is why many vehicles become unreliable. When one thing goes wrong, a lot of damage can be done searching for a fault. Many bits and pieces are disturbed and never work properly again. A knocking noise which started coming out of my Transit a little while ago is a good example of this. A local mechanic convinced me that the noise was coming from the differential gear. I replaced it with a differential from a scrapyard, but still the noise remained.
After further conversations with the mechanic, I decided the fault must be in one of the universal joints. I replaced both of them, but this made the noise worse. Then I noticed a bulge in a tyre. This turned out to be the source of the original noise. Having replaced that, I was still left with the second worst noise. After fitting yet another differential to no avail, I finally cured it by having the prop shaft rebalanced. Unfortunately, I'd forgotten to put any oil in the new differential. I don't want to imply that one should do nothing to a car until it breaks down. Listening for noises, watching the exhaust and looking for oil leaks can all be valuable forms of condition monitoring. However, I suspect that extensive DIY repairs can reduce the long-term reliability of cars. A recent Which survey found that among cars over 6 years old, Volkswagen Beetles were much the most reliable. I now wonder whether this might be due to their policy of discouraging the supply of parts and repairs by DIY mechanics. Unfortunately, the flaw in this theory is that garages are often just as bad, doing just as much damage searching for a fault. I don't think there's any solution. Perhaps Victorian machines, despite their indestructibility, weren't any more reliable than machines today. Conservative design, though boring, has at least made cars more reliable. Testing is not infallible. 100% reliability is almost attainable, and fiddling should be avoided at all costs. Making the machines has mixed blessings. It's very satisfying getting them to work, but they'll never be totally reliable. I sometimes fear I'll end up as a perpetual touring mechanic, fiddling with my life's work. Machines are a source of both inspiration and frustration.